Introduction to Property Investment, Episode 5. I'm joined by Peter Rowlands, who is a property sourcer, and
Hello there.
by Pete, and by our presenter, Ben Hollingsworth. Ben is a property developer, and Ben joins investors and property sellers together. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Multi-lets is your speciality, so I'm going to hand this over to you for the time being.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Karen. Very good evening and welcome everyone to episode 5, like Karen said. Along with Karen and Peter, we're just going to take you through specific strategies on a webinar by webinar basis. If you haven't seen any of our previous webinars, they are available on the £2.73 YouTube page. So you can get that from the Facebook page. Just log on to £2.73 Property and that will bring that up for you. Without further ado, we're going to press straight on. Today's specialist subject is multi-let, a particular favourite of mine because with multi-let you get higher yields, so you get more return for your money. A lot of people say, what is multi-let? It's just a word, isn't it? Well, multi-let is a property that houses 2 or more independent people or families. They can be self-contained or it can be an HMO. Now, we're going to deal with HMOs specifically because it's quite a big topic on the next webinar. Okay, so for today we're going to look at multi-let in self-contained units. Okay, now normally it can be 1 or more building or buildings, and each family or person in there has their own tenancy agreements. So we've got things to talk about like planning, compliance, licensing, and costs. Okay, so if we just take you through this now, I'm going to start by giving you an example of a multi-let building. Now, this little building here, as you can see, was once a Victorian terraced house in a village called Argoed, about a mile or 2 north of Blackwood in South Wales. And this particular property has, many years ago, I believe about 20 to 30 years ago, been split into 3 flats. Now, you'll notice from the front here, you can't really see, but the ground slopes down and there's a little in here, if you can see it on my pointer, there's a little pathway down there. So essentially what you've got a ground floor flat, which is here, and then up the stairs you've got a first floor flat, which is here. They are both 1-bedroom flats. If you go down the pathway, the ground obviously is quite steep, and it takes you down to a lower ground floor level studio flat. So in this little building here, would you believe it, and they are quite spacious, you've got 3 flats. So what does that mean for an investor? Well, ultimately it means you've got 3 tenancy agreements and you've got 3 sets of rent coming in. In this particular example, this was purchased recently by an investor as a trading business, if you like, because there were 3 tenants in there, for £98,500. It produces a gross monthly income of £950. Now, once we take away a small cost for a utility that the landlord pays and also the management costs, the net figure payable to the landlord for an armchair hands-off investment is actually £815 per calendar month. Now, if you were to buy this as a freehold for £98,500 and net £815 per calendar month, we'd be looking at a yield of 11.5%. Now, the yield is always based upon the gross figure. So it's a like for like, you're comparing apples with apples. So if somebody was to say to you, let's have a look at the yield for a single let in Newport in South Wales, Cwmbran, Cardiff, Manchester, Edinburgh, London, wherever they are, we'll look at the purchase price plus the cost of any renovations, take into account the gross rent, because it may be that you manage the property yourself, so you don't pay an agent. It may be you don't pay any utilities. So we look at the gross income, and that will give us our yield figure here. Now, why is this important? Because going back to what I just said about comparing apples with apples, it's really important that we know what we're doing when it comes to multi-let. So that when we can look at a project, we can see what the income is going to be versus what our initial outgoing or our mortgaged outgoing actually was when we initially purchased and did any particular renovations to it. So a nice little example there, and that gets us started. So that if you imagine, typically you would rent a 3-bedroom terraced house, maybe a flat. You would have one tenancy agreement, a single person, a couple, or a family in there. And obviously you would look at the yield, which I guarantee would be significantly lower than the gross yield which you're getting from this particular unit. Yes, you've got 3 separate tenants to look after, but one thing which is always important to me is this. If you had a house, if this here was a house, and you were getting, let's say, £500 per calendar month for it, and your tenants decide to either stop paying or leave, you would be getting absolutely nothing for it. With a property like this, yes, you've got 3 tenants to manage, but you've got 3 sets of rent. So if one tenant goes, you've still got 2/3 of the rent coming in. So that'll cover your mortgage or your outgoings. So in my mind, that's why I love multi-let. Any questions during this presentation, please feel free to put them into the chat box. We'll be happy to answer them at the end, or our contact details will be on here at the end of the presentation, our email addresses, or of course contact us through the £2.73 property group on Facebook, and we'd be happy to answer anything which you've got. And like I said, if you've missed this or any of the other seminars which we put on here, our property tutorials, please feel free to log on to the Facebook page with detail at a later date. I want to give you a quick example of a lease option which exists on our doorstep again here. It's in Abercwmboi, which is near Aberdare in the Rhondda Cynon Valley. Okay, this particular property here was bought on a lease option, which means that the owner of the property, the current owner, has decided to put it out to lease option. Now, what that would basically mean is that the person controlling this property now would be leasing it from the owner, and they would have the option during the lease option term to purchase this particular property at a defined price. So in this particular example, the lease option is a 5-year deal, and the mortgage cost of it is £1,167 per calendar month. Now, as with all rental properties, you have other incremental costs such as maintenance, such as insurance, etc. But the net income from this particular property is actually £1,950 per calendar month. It's broken down here as 8 flats. You can see from the front of the building, it was actually an old chapel. Not that it looks like it now, but you've got flat number 1 there, flat number 2 there. Then there's an entrance around the back on slightly higher ground, which gives you access to number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So you've got 8 really spacious 1-bedroom flats in there. So it's a great property, and it's always full. As soon as somebody decides they want to move out, which is rare, there's always somebody queuing up to move straight back in again. So just to recap on the figures on that, it's a 5-year lease option on that. The net income is £1,950 per calendar month, and the mortgage is £1,167. Now, before obviously costs, that gives the option holder a monthly cash flow of over £700 per calendar month, which is great. Like I say, if you've got any questions on multi-let and you want us to go into any particular subjects, please put them into the chat box. If not, we'll move on again, and next time on our webinar, we're going to take a very detailed look at HMOs. Okay, now HMOs are houses of multiple occupation. Now, whereas we looked at self-contained units in both of those particular examples, and they were both quite small examples. One was obviously 3 flats in one building, the other was 8 flats in one building. It could be up to 100, 1,000 flats, depending where you are in the world. An HMO is slightly different. An HMO normally, although there can be exceptions to this because sometimes self-contained flats do have an HMO license, which I'll explain on the next webinar, an HMO is normally where you have a property which is rented out by the room. Now, sometimes the rooms have ensuite bathrooms in them, sometimes they have kitchenettes in them, but more often than not, you would essentially, just like a hotel, be renting a room, you would share the bathroom, you would share the kitchen, the communal areas with the other tenants in that particular property. So next time, if you are interested in the strategy HMO, again, a really high yielding strategy, we'd be more than happy to obviously go through that with you. Okay, I don't think we've got any questions at this point in time. Karen, Peter, do you have anything to add to this? Clear the throat.
No, Ben, that was really quite informative. Makes me begin to think about whether I should be doing a multi-let or not. I've got a few properties that probably convert quite well.
Yes, yes, yeah. The conversion is something that you would, as you probably know, Karen, but for people out there watching this, if they're not aware, you would actually require planning permission to be put in place on there. Okay. Now, if you are looking to convert a property in South Wales or Wales as a whole under the Welsh Assembly government guidelines, you would need planning permission to convert a building to either an HMO. If you want to convert a house, let's say you've got a 3 or 4 bedroom terraced house, you can quite often easily convert them to a 6 bedroom HMO. There's 2 things which you need to do. Is first of all, you need to obtain necessary planning permission from your local council to do so. And secondly, you would need to make the building compliant with the local council's HMO regulations, so such as things half-hour fire doors, brushes, intermittent strips, fire detection system, etc. All things that you would need to make the property compliant with HMO guidelines. And likewise, if you are converting a property into self-contained units, you could either do it the same way and get an HMO license on there, or you could apply for building regulations, which would mean that you're essentially I don't know, Victorian terraced house, and you're then going to convert that into 3, 4, 5, 10 flats, depending upon the layout and size of that particular property. But you would have to get, first of all, planning permission, and secondly, building regulations for that. And again, another thing, it does depend on if you were to sell the units on as individual self-contained apartments, or if you were to actually keep them, hold them, and rent them out, whether you need an HMO license. It depends upon ratios of owner-occupiers to tenants in that particular building. So it's all quite an interesting subject and something that's quite specific that we can focus on at a later date.
Ben, I'm just wondering now, I know with I just say with a lot of things around the country and different councils, do different councils have different regulations with HMOs as well?
Massively, hugely, yes, yeah. There is basically a blanket legislation for HMOs across the UK that was introduced in 2004 and recently amended in 2018. But every single council has their own legislation in place. So I see it a lot on social media where people ask, can I convert to a 6-bedroom HMO? Somebody will pop up and say, yes, you can, depending whether it's on no more than 2 floors, or this happens, that happens, the other happens. What I always put in straight away is, hey, what might happen for you, for example, in Hull could be very different to what might happen in London or what might happen in Newport. They're all individual councils. They all have individual regulations. Newport, for example, our hometown here, where the council are very, very strict. You know, you need basically an HMO license if 2 or more families live in the same property, whereas in some parts of the UK, I'm led to believe that you can have up to 6 people without an HMO license if it's on no more than 2 floors. So the thing to do there, and it's really easy to do, is look at where the property is, find out what the local authority is, go onto the local authority website, just type into the search bar HMO, and bingo, everything will pop up for you. All the rules, the regulations, what you must have, what you mustn't have. I mean, for example, I heard recently, although not enforced, in Reading, you must have sinks in every single room. How old-fashioned is that? You don't see a bedroom with just a sink. I mean, yes, ensuite bathrooms all the rage, but a bedroom with just a sink in it. But there is a legislation in the HMO regulations for Reading that you must have that. Although I'm assured by the HMO officer they don't actually enforce that because it's pretty pointless. But it's all small things like that. You've got to be specific to your defined area, and you've got to know exactly what your council will need, because it's all very well doing the conversion. In order to obtain the license, the council will inspect that particular property. So if they come along and inspect and you haven't done something, it could be very costly to if you like, contra-add that at a later date. So always do your homework on it, check first, really easy information to find on the council website, and that'll tell you exactly what you do need to actually do. If you're in any doubts, then they'll always try and be helpful. Phone either, they may have an individual HMO department, some councils have. If not, it'll be under housing or environmental health, and they'll be able to obviously run through with you exactly what you need to do in that particular area.
That's great, Ben. Some really fantastic information there.
Wonderful.
And I know some councils can be very difficult to work with.
Yes.
Some councils are very friendly and will do the utmost to help you and to make sure that you comply and they get more, basically, beds available to let in their area. So you just have to deal with the councils and just basically take them as you find them.
Yes, I think a lot of it to do with councils as well is down to the individual person within the council you actually speak to. Because I've dealt with certain councils, which will remain nameless, and some people are extremely helpful. They're out there. They want to see you create a business. They want to see you create much needed accommodation in this sector, whereas other people are not so much career focused. Let's put it that way politely.
So before I bring this to an end, is there any questions? Just put them in the chat, and if you've got any questions. If not, this, as Ben said, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which is £2.73 Club. And we have the 273 Club Limited Facebook page, where you can get a whole heap of information from there as well. Our next event will be on the second Tuesday of March, when, as Ben said, we'll be looking at HMOs in depth. So I'd like to thank Ben for all his knowledge that he willingly shares with us. I'd like to thank Pete for coming in and helping us. And I'd like to thank you for attending, and any questions at all, just put them into the YouTube or onto our Facebook page, and we'll be happy to help you with whatever we can. So I don't know if anyone's got a date for the second Tuesday of March. I'll just look it up in the calendar in a minute.
12th.
I thought you meant whether anyone's got a date. I was going to say my wife would be pretty annoyed if I bought someone else.
12th of March.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so that's the next date for the diary. And if you 7:30 p.m. our usual time, and we repeat these on the 2nd and the 4th Tuesday of each month. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Ben and Peter for your input and information on this, and I look forward to chatting to everyone again next time round. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thanks guys. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, mate.
All the best.
All the best.